Hi there. My name is Lee, and this video begins with us sitting in the dark. Sitting in my room in East Vancouver on unceded Coast Salish territories. In being invited to participate in this project, this Housing Matters media project, I was both excited as well as incredibly confused. I'm confused about how here on Turtle Island, how we discuss housing without first discussing violence. Colonial violence, capitalist violence, the violence of systemic inequities and inequalities. How do we discuss housing without discussing migration, status, privilege? Without acknowledging first and foremost the land that our houses rest on, the histories and herstories our houses are built on top of, the fact that we occupy houses on occupied lands. If we're really going to discuss housing, it seems to me we have to begin at a really fundamental level of questioning ourselves, questioning how we live, how we have constructed the ways we live. These questions would implicate our values. They would implicate our interactions with one another. This isn't just about the material realities of our housing conditions. It's about our worldview. I guess I can turn a light on now. This video you're watching is a glimpse. It's a snapshot, a series of snapshots. It begins in my room, where I've lived for almost 4 months now. And then the houses of friends and colleagues and mentors who really kindly invited me into their homes and had conversations about the housing crisis with me. I've been subletting places since I arrived here about a year ago. I've moved 9 times since I've been here, and along with many other people in the city, I was overwhelmed by both the prices and scarcity of affordable housing. I feel like my story is only one small part of a much larger discussion around housing, and I feel like my story is a privileged one. You know, there's so much more to this conversation than a 5-minute video can really convey, and I guess this video attempts to offer an insight into some of the questions and sounds and images that have come up in relation to the idea of housing.
We don't address our spirits in our concept of housing. So we need to have a more holistic view, body, mind, spirit, which would help not just with how we live, but how we perceive, how we feel. And we could extend our hearts further into our communities because we're more tuned in to the earth. Look how far removed I am from it. That's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So there has to be a whole different concept and perception. And that's not going to happen in the system that we have.
There are the underlying crises of the systems we are living in, and the housing crisis is just one symptom of a much larger problem.
Why is there an economic crisis and a food crisis and a housing crisis and like all this abundance, right? Like the idea and mentality that like we live in scarcity is also part of like what capitalism feeds off of, right? Like it needs you to believe that there's not enough to go around.
The policies, the attitudes, the structures, because these are all structures that are being built, are now going to want to self-preserve, because this is what power does, right? Power just replicates and self-preserves and only gives what it can.
Something has to change at some point, you know? And I think it's just like our approach has to change. It must.
Where is the space inside this conversation of the housing crisis to share our stories, not just 5-minute bite-sized video versions, but to really acknowledge where we are and where we have come from, to acknowledge what has happened here? We didn't get to a housing crisis out of nowhere. Are these conversations being brought up at tables discussing policies and zoning and planning and development strategies? And where are those tables anyway? And which communities are being invited to those tables? And how many degrees and what areas of specialty did you have to study to be given that invitation in the first place? As I'm sitting in my room, I really keep thinking through the comment about addressing our spirit in housing. I guess I'm curious how we find solutions for not just the current housing crisis we find ourselves in, but the systemic crisis we find ourselves in.